exist? And are they just as curious about humans as we are interested in them? News Nation special correspondent Ross Coldhart got an inside look at what the American government might know about non-human life in an exclusive interview with a former Pentagon official titled Confessions of a UFO Hunter.
Ross, we're not alone. We are not alone in this universe, and it is a simple fact. And the U.S. government has been aware of that fact now for decades.
That former Pentagon official and UFO hunter, Lou Elizondo, joins me live. He's also the author of the book Imminent: Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs. Lou, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. You make a lot of claims regarding UFOs and UAPs, including alien abduction and the government attempting to lure extraterrestrials by using nuclear weapons. What's the response been since News Nation's exclusive interview aired on Friday?
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for having me. Yes, in my book, I explore a lot of the things that I think the general public have heard about, but really never had any information about. And some of it, there is some substantial information that points that the U.S. government has indeed have a long-standing UFO program and has had this program for decades. Some of the findings, I think, that people will find very interesting is that we did try to recover craft, and in some cases we did. And in some cases, biologics were obtained from those crashes. And just to if I can, just to put kind of a cherry on top of this conversation, my book was approved. It took about a year, but went through the review process of the Pentagon to make sure there was no classified information in there. And it took almost a year, but they finally released the book.
And you allege that the government is conducting experiments on the human brain in relation to remote viewing. What can you tell us about that?
Sure. Well, the remote viewing program went by many names. One of them was called Stargate. Before that, it was called Grill Flame, et cetera, and began really in the late 1960s, early 1970s, led by a gentleman, one of my former colleagues, actually, Dr. Hal Puthoff, who actually worked at the time at Stanford University and created what is now known as the, quote, psychic spy program for the Central Intelligence Agency. And those techniques were quite effective. There's a lot of information to substantiate that, yeah, actually the program did work, even though it was eventually shut down due to budgetary concerns.
You also say that there was resistance to you investigating UAPs. I know you just talked about your book, the process to get it approved. What was the resistance to this?
Yeah, Brooke, it wasn't just me. We actually had an office, and there were actually, what I was surprised to find, that there were other UFO programs running besides ours and before ours. And I think what I found most compelling were some of the videos that you're now showing the audience. But there's some videos out there that are extremely high definition. And when you look at them and you realize that these vehicles are performing in ways that, frankly, outperform anything we have in our inventory, and we're pretty darn sure outperforms anything in our adversary inventory as well, one is forced then to come to the conclusion that if it's not ours and it's not theirs, whose technology is this? And oh, by the way, this technology is finding its way over controlled U.S. airspace and over controlled sensitive military installations, and has the ability to interfere with our nuclear technology.
Lou, if I can here quickly, you made a lot of, profound claims in your book and in your interview with us here on News Nation. Again, talking about remote viewing, conducting experiments on the human brain, alien abduction. What would you say to people who are watching this and are skeptical? What's your response?
Yeah, absolutely. People should always remain skeptical. I think healthy skepticism is important. My background was science initially in college, and then I became a special agent. So I'm very much just a facts kind of guy. I prefer to follow the data rather than opine about something without the data. But in this case, there's very compelling data. Now, as far as abductions are concerned, I discuss it. I was never involved in anything where I had any information to firsthand about alleged abductions. I do discuss it because there were individuals who were very interested in that particular aspect of the phenomenon. My focus was more on the nuts and bolts and how it dealt with our military technologies and how it had the ability to interfere with our military equities.
Lou Elizondo, thank you for joining us on a Monday morning. Appreciate you sharing all of that with us.
Future of everything by now. If you see this video, You know exactly what people are going to start talking about, UFOs, and that is what this new book is all about. Imminent, Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs. But what you might not know is the guy who wrote this book is actually the guy behind those videos being declassified and released for the world to see. Lou Elizondo is a former high-ranking DOD insider who was so frustrated with what he says or attempts to cover up information about UFOs that he was the one who was working behind the scenes to get those images to the public in 2017. And in this new book, he's got stories that will make those videos look like nothing. And Lou Elizondo joins us now. Lou, thank you so much for being with us. You and I have been talking about this for years, and I got to say, our audience is pretty far ahead of the curve, so we can jump straight in. But there is a lot in this book that, like, immediately raised my eyebrows. Like, you never told me that you were trained as a remote viewer. That's like men who stare at goat-style, psychically trained spy stuff, right?
Well, you know, it certainly seems that way, but in reality, the U.S. government has a long history and affinity with basically any type of capability to spy or get the advantage on our adversaries. And remote viewing was actually started by one of my colleagues, Dr. Hal Puthoff, back in the late 60s and early 70s, using at the time, Stanford University with the CIA to actually create a psychic espionage program called Stargate. Had other names as well before, but Stargate is perhaps the most famous name of that program.
And Lou, Stargate got shut down, and yet in your book you say that other countries are probably still using some of these psychic abilities, I guess for a lack of a better word there, and some of our trained soldiers, including you, were also are possibly using them. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. Even today in law enforcement, I know it sounds kind of kooky, but psychics have been used to a great deal of success. I think the issue, the rub here, is that when people say, you know, psychic espionage and whatnot, they think of the woo factor. But in reality, a lot of scientists now believe that capability is really part of the human consciousness, the brain aspect, which is maybe tied to quantum mechanics and frankly, quantum entanglement. So we may not be talking about really anything science fiction, but really just advanced science fact.
I don't want to eat into the time on UFOs because that's also possibly the biggest existential question ever. In your book, you say you could write a book about remote viewing. So we're going to circle back. We'll have you on just to talk about all that. But let's just jump straight into some of the biggest things that stuck out from this book. You say one of the first conversations you had with Hal, you were told that Roswell was real and it was covered up, and there were 4 non-human bodies recovered from that crash. So if that happened, where are the bodies? Where is the craft? And how many more bodies and crafts do you think the government has?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the bodies were taken initially to a military installation, and then from there, it gets a little murky. We also, a lot of people don't know that there are actually 2 crashes initially in 2 events that occurred in Roswell. And to put this on a very quick backdrop, Roswell is where we located our B-29 bombers that were specifically outfitted right after we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to carry an atom bomb. And it was one of the only air bases, frankly, in the world at the time where these aircraft were stationed. And we know that UAP have had an affinity both to our nuclear capabilities and our military capabilities.
I'm from New Mexico, so I grew up with this lore. And in your book, you kind of talk about the possibility that, you know, maybe these crashes were happening in New Mexico because of the beginning of the dawn of the nuclear age and EMP pulses, and maybe that messed with the craft. Is that right?
Yeah, so the current theory is that we were testing a particular device out there, and it happened to interfere with the propulsion units of these UAP. And again, I know it sounds crazy, but it appears that is exactly what happened. And the U.S. government, as a result, was able to recover one of these vehicles and hide it away.
Now, so much of this tracks with what David Grush testified to in front of Congress. Everybody was watching that. But then when we pressed him on specifics, other people have pressed him on specifics. He always says he can't provide them because they are classified, in Roswell in particular. But your book, you also had to go through a year-long DOD review process. But, like, I got to ask, why didn't they redact the Roswell stuff or a lot of the other specifics from your book?
Yeah, you know, can't tell you. That's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. really, because once you write something, it becomes indelible, becomes part of the record. And I knew that because I hold a current security clearance, I'd have to go through the official review process, which almost took a year. That's a pretty long time. And even then, when I got the book back, there's still redactions. In fact, if you look at the book now, you will see blacked out areas that the government was not very happy with me discussing. And so they thought it was too sensitive. But David Grush, I can tell you for a fact, he is 100% legitimate. I actually worked with him. I can't say specifically where, but we were colleagues. And what he is telling the American people is only a fraction of what he actually knows.
Speaking of the Pentagon not being happy with some of the stuff that you've been talking about, the Pentagon has said they've looked into crash retrievals and under the office that they have right now, and they've found no substantiated evidence of any of this existing. When you see those statements coming out from the DOD right now, what's your reaction?
My statement is try harder. The bottom line is we know they're there. And we also know that the Pentagon never lies, right? Except for Pentagon Papers and Iran-Contra, and, you know, the list goes on and on. The bottom line is that the U.S. government is very well aware of this since the end of the 40s and even during the 1940s, during World War II with the Foo Fighters, where our allied pilots were actually encountering UFOs while in combat. So this is nothing new for the U.S. government. And people look at our program, ATIP and OSAP, and they say, well, that's the first program. It wasn't. There's a long succession of UFO programs, officially sanctioned UFO programs that the government has been involved with for decades. And I think that's something the American people should know.
And talking about what the American people should know and what's true and what's not, I mean, in your book, you were alleging that UAPs can hurt people, and you even describe reports of people being burned, people possibly dying, alien implants that have been removed from human bodies. Those are terrifying things to read about. And yet, what is the evidence?
So keep in mind that our program was really focused on military eyewitness accounts, military capabilities like gun camera footage and radar footage. We weren't really interested in the civilian data too much, at least not my effort. You know, these anecdotes where grandma maybe saw some lights in the backyard, that wasn't our focus. We're talking about trained military observers with some of the best, most capable, sophisticated technologies that's out there, radar, gun camera footage, and other capabilities I really can't talk about, all collecting information at the same place, at the same time, under the same circumstances, saying that's a real thing. And by the way, it can outperform anything we have in our inventory.
And Lou, I got to say, if I was a government-trained spy that had possible psychic abilities and was able to remote view, and I was looking into all this stuff, like one of the first things I would probably do, especially even if I left the government, was to sit down, use whatever abilities I had to remote view myself into a UFO. Have you done that?
No, and frankly, I never said I was a good remote viewer. I was taught early on some techniques by one of the top Army's remote viewers. Wonderful gentleman, very, very gifted. Sadly, I was not that gifted, but it turns out that a lot of people have that capability. And it's really, I think, once you talk to some of the scientists, you realize it's not paranormal like people suggest it is. It's probably just some sort of latent capability that humans have had for a very long time before we really were able to verbalize communication with one another, and it became very sophisticated. Dogs, for example, when they come across and they see each other, there's some sort of nonverbal communication, and some scientists are speculating maybe that's a form of, you know, we call it psychic, but in reality, it's just a normal part of human interactions, and a lot of people can do it.
Lou, we didn't even get into the orbs that have been harassing you and your family. I mean, there's so much other stuff in this book. So I hope you'll be back on the show. We really do want to delve as deeply into this as we possibly can. But for now, Lou, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Gaddy, my honor and privilege, and thank you for doing what you do.